All right, welcome back to another episode of the Shit Take. This week we have a special guest on with us, our friend Rain. As always, me, Stella B, and my partner in crime.
Arrow for the win. How y'all doing?
Rain has some topics for us today, and we're gonna mostly let him take control. But this conversation is probably gonna go off the rails, if I'm being honest. So let's get to it.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I had really planned to talk about today was just on the spectrum of where do you lie on of skeptic believer or in between of just cryptids, I guess in general, or cryptozoology, because some people like to refer to that. But not so much because I was thinking about it, and sometimes it leans into the paranormal, which, I mean, you could have whatever, but I'm talking about, like, if you go out into the woods, and which is already a scenario, and you see something run across like your line of sight, are you the kind of person like it's just like a wolf, or are you gonna look at them and go, I think Bigfoot's trying to step on us, and you just immediately want to go up to there and like capture that? Like, because I'm all for that. I'm gonna be quite honest. if I see something like out there, I fully believe like, okay, that's not of this earth. That's something like out there that I don't understand. I'm fully ready to embrace it. I'm not sure what you guys line on though.
I think honestly, like if gun in my head, black and white ideal. I think that there's already enough in the world that I don't understand personally. I can't explain. So if I were to just strictly say like, oh, that's just this or that's nonsense, I feel like my own view would be so like people are skeptic on that. So I would be like, hey, you know what, dude? Like, say you found tracks of something, and they happen to be just a bit too spaced out to be like, oh, this is a bear, this is a wolf, this is a fox, whatever. Maybe one of the tracks looks bigger. It's already dark. You're in the woods for, like you said, a scenario. So I might not be able to tell what that is. And for if to go further down the hole, if there is something in front of me that I can't explain, that I am like physically seen with my own eyes, chances are a mass populace isn't gonna agree with that anyway. They're not gonna believe me. Yeah. So I have one of two choices. Do I turn into like some absurdist, like you gotta believe me, you gotta go to the facts, the truth is now.com, something like that, or do you like, you know what, I'm gonna keep this to myself, maybe share with some close friends that may not judge me too harshly? Yeah. But I toe the line definitely on that. Like, I can't say for sure yes or no.
I lean a little bit more skeptic. I think in general, when it comes to cryptids, when it comes to paranormal, even when it comes to religion, right? I'm pretty much the skeptic. Don't get me wrong, right? Like, if there's evidence, there's evidence, but that evidence has to be real evidence. And there's so much false claims. There's so much of people who are trying to pull one over on everybody on the internet,
right?
That they've basically taken all legitimacy of any of these claims like completely away. They ruin it for everybody else because they're trying to fool the internet and they're trying to fool everybody. So I mean, that's why I lean skeptic. But again, if there's proof, what can you really say against proof, right? I mean, apparently there's a whole lot, because there's a whole lot of people who will have proof shoved right in their fucking face. Yeah. They're still just gonna fucking deny it 100%. But I mean, I think I'm a rational person, and yeah, like if I'm in the woods, right, and there's something really massive, I'm probably gonna think it's a bear. That's exactly. That's my first thought, obviously. I'm not gonna jump to Bigfoot.
Yeah.
I'd love to jump to Bigfoot, but
I would.
I love like mystery. I love my one of my favorite subjects of all is gonna be space, right? Like the unknown, the exploration of it all. It's just that's the best thing to me. I don't believe in reincarnation, but right, I want there to be reincarnation so I can fucking live in a time where space travel is super fucking common. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So, I mean, I would love for these things to be real, or not to be real, but for them to, I guess be real, whatever.
Have substantial whatever evidence.
But without that actual personal experience,
tangible proof. Yeah. Well, let me ask you something, Stella B. Like, would it be easier for you to believe that the unknown, or like, the possibility of these, creatures or, specimens, if you want to call them that, would exist beyond the stars than, versus our own back home.
You mean like, do I think it's more tangible that they exist?
Yeah,
Like,
would it, okay, I don't want to say extraterrestrial, whatever. Would it be easier for you to accept like an extraterrestrial versus something like, a Bigfoot or a Wendigo?
Yes. Well, I wouldn't say easier, but I honestly believe, right? Like, since just by virtue of us being here, there's probably something else out there. You know what I mean?
Right.
Right.
But when it comes
I mean,
to like,
that's.
no, go ahead.
I would say, I mean, that's like a whole nother. So that's like a whole nother
That's fine.
like category, because cause like some people consider like, oh,
You know
would
what? Okay,
aliens
we're
count?
gonna do this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because some people would say like, oh, would aliens count towards that? And like personally, I think like that's a whole nother subcategory, because you can argue, if like Mothman or Bigfoot or Loch Ness or anything like that, exists or not. But I mean, we don't know anything about space as much as we think we do. So it's very easy just to be like, no, like yes, technically, we ourselves are extraterrestrials to something else out there.
Yeah.
If it exists. So of course, yeah, no, it's way more plausible to be like, no, there's probably something else out there in space than it is to say there's something here.
To something else.
Exactly, that's the problem.
Bigfoot people in my life.
Exactly.
I'm close. I'm 6'5", man. I could easily pass as a fucking Sasquatch.
Exactly. I mean, at that point, though, just like to be on the topic of like things that seem otherworldly that are here, like, in general, the conversation of cryptid of, skeptical, believer, in between, whatever, it always boils down to personal experience or what you've seen, things like that. And in the end, for me, I guess what really sells it for me and why I'm always willing to jump at the opportunity to be like, no, that is a fantastical monster, and I am sure of it. The only reason why I'm always going to go to that is always just going to be that with such a wide sense of people like believing the same thing, and with what little evidence there is, like I'm just all for it. Because I mean, if it's a bear or anything else, like sure, fine, but in a way that's not fun. And if there's the small chance that it is something crazy, like I want to be there to get that, and so I'll wholeheartedly believe in it if it means chasing that just to get it. And maybe there's another statement on that, on like looking for it rather than like wholeheartedly believing, but.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes that's what you need. Like, I want to, like, I like just by doing research, by looking some stuff up and like recapping, like, every cryptid always boils down to, here's a humanoid covered in fur or moss. Here's some sort of like feral creature. Here's an alien, or here's a sea monster. And it's always baseline all of that. And it's always going to be that. And it's always like, well, there's a reason these are common, because that's just what a lot of people describe them as. And, if you shoot enough shots, you're going to land one of them. Like, there's a chance that one of those does, in fact, exist.
But something else, right? Like, you got to think about it like this. Well, 2 points, really, right? So just to that last one that you mentioned, right? One being a sea monster, one being, a monster from deep inside the woods. The other one being,
right.
Like the Mothman, the Mothman appearing at night, in the darkness. The only way you're ever going to see him is he's in the dark, right? I think those stories exist because they're all situations where it's hard to identify what it is you're actually looking at.
Right.
And so that's why they're all that way, at least from my perspective, right? That's why they're all that
Exactly.
way, because they're all in situations where it's going to be a super difficult thing to identify these things.
Mm-hmm.
And to the first point, right? Yeah, I agree. It's cool to think like there are like creatures out there. Like, don't get me wrong, right? Like as a kid, right? I always thought that Bigfoot was like a thing. I always wanted to go out and hunt for Bigfoot as a kid, right? 100%. About 6 or 7 years ago is whenever my mindset kind of changed, and it was when I made a personal decision in my life, kind of doing my own thing and breaking away from my personal like religion and whatnot. And it was all this one quote, right? Like I remember hearing it, and it hit me, and I was like, oh shit, that's interesting way to think about it, right? It's magical, right? Like it's magical, especially if you're thinking about it like in a religious standpoint. It is magical, right? But then the assumption, right, is that because it's magical the one way, it's not magical the other way. But the truth is, or at least from my perspective and from the perspective of the person who said it, isn't it also, and if not even more magical, to think that something might have happened like that on accident? You know what I mean? Specifically
Right.
with like the Earth and how it was made, right? Like, yes,
Exactly.
anyone can design a planet, right? Like,
Yeah.
props to God. Don't get me wrong, right? Like, if you believe in God 100%, that's cool.
Great world building.
But like, I can get on a planet simulator today and build a planet
Exactly.
on any random video game if I, as long as that
Yeah.
software is there. But to think that it happened completely of accident, to me, that sounds even more grand.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm of the same belief there. Where like sometimes it's better to know that something happened completely by chance. Like that's almost like way better than saying like, oh no, it was planned. But for the evidence part, also what comes back to it is like, I know it's always, I don't want to say a meme because that's the wrong terminology, but it's always like, the thing that happens is always like, why is the footage always grainy, or why is it always at night? And I think that's where like most like research, and you'll see this too, a lot of like facts and everything, or facts or like proof always comes back to like, oh well, here's footage in the daytime. It's like, yes, but it's so far away you can't really see what's happening. I think that's where the birth of all that was, just like the Bigfoot footage of like, oh, here's a guy 20 feet away, looks like a big gorilla, and it's like in the daytime, and it's like, sure, it's shaky, but you can stabilize it, and like, it's always weird when it comes down to that.
I think what a lot of that has to do with is just like the human mind attempting to rationale as much as it is. Like if you saw something, like Bigfoot or like the Mothman or whatever, and like you said earlier, like, oh, it's just a human covered in like fur or moss or whatever. It's like that's what the brain is trying to do. Like, oh, it couldn't be anything more than just a human in a suit, or oh yeah, there's people like you said, or there are people 6'5", 6'6". It could easily just be them hiking or whatever like that. And part of that, wonder or mystery is just like, oh well, I'm afraid to approach it because what if it is that, and it turns out to be hostile. That's why we
Yeah.
don't see it. And you see it always like, whether it's like, a cheesy B movie or something like, reality show Finding Bigfoot or the Mothman Chronicles, the Jersey Devil, it's always like, it's never like they meet this thing and then it's like super kind and caring, like
Yeah.
giving them the fruits of the land. It's always something that's like either
And the
demonized.
innocence.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
besides that, all right. Or what is it, Strange Wilderness, and they find they find Bigfoot. Like, it's always there's an antagonistic, approach to it, and I think that maybe, it kind of like sits in people's mind like, oh, like I'm using this
Yeah.
video recording camera from 1985 and I'm like 100 yards away. I can't like really zoom into it.
Yeah, I
But,
think odds are, right, if you did come across one and it was real, it's probably going to be hostile towards you. It's the only way to
Yeah.
survive this long, you know what I mean?
exactly,
feel-
you're gonna
It's
amongst
funny
the
because
bones.
like it's funny because like 90% of like all like cryptid research, or I say research, and it could just be guys on the Travel Channel with the guns like, we're gonna get ourselves a Bigfoot.
Yeah.
But 90% of like people who do like those research or anything, they're always just like, oh yeah, no, it was walking in, it was startled, and I thought I was gonna die. And it's like, all right, cool. But then you look at things that are like more based in animals. Like I actually didn't notice to do research, but like I didn't know that the jackalope's considered a cryptid, because it's like, oh, we see them, but we can't explain them, and it's like, does that
Yeah.
count? And it's like, oh well, all they do is just like rabbits, like they just like jump around, and it's like, that's not like hostile, and so because of that, I feel like there's no sensation behind it, so it's like almost never covered. But then you see something like, I was looking it up, like I forget which state it was, but they have one that they're just like, oh, it's essentially just a werewolf, but it lives in our state, and I'm like, all right, go ahead. What does it do? I was like, it attacks people. I was like, all right, anything else that it does besides being hostile and being weird and creepy? I was like, because I want to hear about like the stuff that's ominous.
And see that's the thing too, like with these, cryptids, these, creatures of the other side. Like just if you think about it with animals too, it's like if you go into the wild, usually the animal is hostile. And
Yeah.
it's just like you're invading its natural, environment, its ecosystem, whatever you want to call it, and it's just like how the hell would you feel if
Yeah.
somebody literally just burst through your door with like, oh wow, we're finally seeing the prey, the
To put
subject.
you on as a spectacle.
Exactly,
Not that
it's
you
crazy.
understand that, but still.
Mhm.
I honestly, I think Futurama said it best when they were like hunting for Bigfoot. He's like, why don't you just put a bunch of cameras in the forest and explore it and record all day and night. And he's like, well, because that would cost a lot of money, and people who believe in Bigfoot don't have any. And it's just like, that always comes down to it. You know what I mean? Like, that's what you see, Finding Bigfoot. That's a show on like what, A&E or like Travel Channel, something ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you clearly have a budget, but you're not doing it like, because what happens if you found Bigfoot? Then that's it. The show's over.
Yep. That's the end of the story.
Found big.
It's always those
Found
things of like,
Bigfoot.
Hey,
if we find them, yeah, it's like it's always those things of if we find them, the story's gonna break far before the episode comes out. There's no
Yeah.
way you're gonna have that hidden, so you always know
Yeah.
they're never gonna do it because you're like, I would have found out by now, especially if I'm an avid Bigfootman,
It's not gonna be contained to them.
Yeah, and when it comes down to it, even the cryptids, they're like, oh, these are not hostile, or we're just observing them, and they're not like territorial or anything. It's always things like Loch Ness, or there's something called like the Loch Ness of Alaska, which they even disproved, by the way, but they're like, well, we still don't know. But things like that where it's like, oh, they're in their own zone. They're in their own zone that we can't operate in. Oh, they're in the water. Or like, I don't know if you've ever seen them, but like the Fresno Nightwalkers or the Fresno Walkers. I don't know if you've ever seen
heard
those.
of that. I've heard of it, yes.
Well, and the footage is actually pretty compelling. It's one of my favorite like found footage like cryptid things, but it's pretty much just like these like beings. I don't know how else to describe them, where it's just like an upper body and legs, and they just walk like across, and they look like they're like 12 feet tall, and they go from one side of the screen to the other, and then they're gone. And they're just like, well, we checked everywhere and we couldn't find them. Or like, oh, the security guard who found it didn't want to investigate it because they didn't know what they were looking at. And it's like, okay, cool, that makes sense. But it's like, those are the only times they're docile was when no one's around to look at them. Or like the Flywoods monsters, where they're just like, oh, there's just these alien-like creatures that were just staring at me. I didn't do anything and I left. And it's like, oh, well, they weren't hostile. It's like, yeah, because they probably didn't know you were there because you weren't moving. And it just always boils down to, which is funny because that's, ghosts and aliens almost, which is other things besides like comparing cryptids. Yeah, and it's just like, and it just always comes down to it of just, here's these things that we don't know about, but you're willing to believe in it because you're not going to get close enough to disprove it, and you're not going to get close enough to get hurt if it is proven. Like I fully believe, I honestly believe with all of my heart that there has been a handful of people who have found cryptids, whether it be Bigfoot, Mothman, Jersey Devil, I don't think the goat man counts. Chupacabra, which I have a story about that. Chupacabra, and like if you find it, you're either not making it out alive or it was a big mistake. And it's just like, oh, people did find Bigfoot. People didn't find the guys who found Bigfoot, but Bigfoot found them, and now they're gone.
If it follows the rules of the horror movie, if you have the found footage or whatever, they find the camera, but there's the body parts or something like that. Like, oh, let me upload this before it gets me my final call out.
And it's 2 situation.
Exactly, and it's crazy.
I personally think that like if they were real, right? Anything that would have existed on land, if they were real, we would know by now. We would have concrete evidence. We'd have video footage. We'd have something that shows it, right? The ones that I do think, of course, that there's a real strong potential, right? That's all the underwater. Because who the fuck knows in the water?
Yeah,
we
don't
haven't
know
even
that.
explored it. We can't go that far. James Cameron can only go so far before that pod starts to crack.
Yeah.
There's a fucking species of jellyfish that is literally immortal.
Yeah.
It is literally immortal. If you're gonna tell me that exists, then I can potentially believe that anything exists. But they've shown me this jellyfish. They haven't shown me Loch Ness. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's
Or things like the giant squid.
You're gonna see a society down there. It's just gonna
Okay,
be like
well,
everyone who looks.
Like I love Loch Ness monster. Like I kiss Nessie all the time, right? Like that's how I fist bump. That's how I fist bump. But like, I don't want to sound terrible, and I'm surely not making fun of anybody who does believe it. But just me personally, I don't lean that way.
Yeah, and I fully understand that. I feel like that's fundamental. You have to understand you have to understand both sides to root force.
Yeah, did that, man.
Yeah, I mean,
100%. Like I do hope for it to be real. Like 100%.
Here's the facts.
Pump the brakes.
Here's the facts. Now I want to preface this with 3 things. 1, I was very young when this happened.
Okay.
2, I myself never saw the proof, but I did see it in like the local paper. And 3, this did not happen in my town. This happened over at my grandma's house, and she lives like in the she lives almost in like middle of nowhere, Texas. Like she's like one of the 3 houses on her street, and it's like on a county road, things like that. Very small town. Um, I I had to have been at least like between like 10 and like 13 or so, like very young. And we're out there in the country, and in the middle of the night, like I'm sleeping, we're at my grandma's house. She doesn't have a lot of room, so I always love sleeping in like the living room. And I just hear like my grandpa going to the car and leaving. And then I wake up the next morning, I'm like, hey, where did grandpa go? She go, oh, they went to your aunt's house. And she lives even further into the country, like trees surrounding her house kind of thing. And I saw in the paper the next day, and it was just local woman captures chupacabra. And I was like, no, that's not real. What is that? And by God, I see pictures, and it looks exactly what you would describe it as, like hairless, 4-legged feral creature. She has like dogs out there, and they had pictures of the dogs that were also attacked by this thing. Whatever it was, like it ran and got hit by a car, and then like they took pictures of it, and then when they went to go call like the police or whatever, body was gone, and like and it was in like the field, like cornfield or like wheat field or whatever, and you could see things moving, but that was it. And I remember because I was like, I don't believe you, or of course, I was really young, so I was like, whoa, tell me more. I don't know what that is. And in the paper, and of course, they would have the cameras, like the disposable cameras, so they were on film, so they're like tangible physical pictures. Yeah. Like you can't edit those, but it's gonna be way more trouble than it's worth in this country home that like doesn't have internet or like a cell phone. Like it's like all landline, like dish TV, things like that. And like it was in the paper for a while, and I was like, wow, that's crazy. And like I never heard about it outside of that. I just call it dish. I don't know what it's actually, satellite. I never dish my whole life, but like it never left that like small town, and I was like, oh, of course it's not going. Over time, I figured like, of course it's not going to. You're not gonna be like small town in nowhere, South Texas discovers creature. Like that's not gonna attract tourists or anything. So of course they're not gonna care. Like that's just that truth. But ever since I saw that, I was like, maybe there's something. And there's always stories too that my dad would tell me where he would travel a lot for work and he would be like, oh, because he would work with refineries, and those are outside of town because you don't want anything bad to happen and it affects like housing or whatever. Yeah. And there was always things where like, oh, you're out there and like people work overnight jobs and you see something in the distance you can't explain, and then you go to investigate and it's like, hey, these are tracks of something we don't know that shouldn't be here because nothing should be out here. What's going on? And there's pictures taken of that too. And of course, sadly, I say all that, I don't have any of the pictures. Obviously, these are all from relatives and family members that I don't have connection to. Yeah, but like, I don't know. I need to find out where exactly she lives. I think she still lives at that house too, so I can probably ask her. Like, I probably go out there and be like, where did you find the body? It was the part that line. But like, I'll look for it. I'll try to like see if I could send it or anything. But
I'm
like
for it right now.
But like ever since then, I was always just like, maybe, and it was just like a lingering thing. It was like a lingering thing. I never went too delved into it. When you're that young, you don't have all the resources to go out and hardy boys your way into an adventure.
The hardy boys.
And fight like solve the mystery that the local police or detectives can't. Like you can't do that. But it gets to a point where.
How embarrassed would they be if you did?
They would never publish a story. First of all, they would manipulate it and do usual.
I found this.
Exactly. Not that kid. Not me. But yeah, it's just like things like that. Like I mean, that's like a personal thing. But like ever since then, whatever comes across my way, I'm always down to just be like, I need to deep dive more further into this. And there's various other stories where things like this happen in local towns, and they never get national news or like news outside of that town for the obvious reason would be you can't capitalize monetarily off of it. So of course they're not going to like promote it, or if they do promote it, they're just like, well, don't include any personal information. I don't want people to think I'm weird or crazy. And it's like, well, why are you reporting it then?
Tell anybody.
Like exactly. And so just like various circumstances always lead to it never leaving the room, or never leaving like the area. But in the end, that's still evidence that's out there that you could probably, like, if you were to travel and ask around, they'd probably, like, and I'm not talking about this in specific instance, but in general, like, you go to West Virginia and they're just like, I saw Mothman. He was over there eating at my restaurant, and it's like, okay, sure.
He was at the bar.
He was at the bar.
Eggs.
On drinks for everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
but then you have somebody else, and they're just yeah. But you have somebody
Uh,
else, and they're just like, oh yeah, no, I saw it. Like I saw it. Like it was right across the street, right there. And it's just like, who would lie about something so minuscule like that, like randomly?
A lot of people.
Like, and I know a lot of people, but I mean, like, especially if you're going by yourself with no camera, like if you're not doing like a big investigation for TV. Like if I myself walked to some random guy in New Mexico and was like, have you seen a chupacabra? And he's just like, doesn't know me. He's like, yeah, over there. I'm like, okay, cool, thanks. And if I just leave, it's like, you're not getting anything out of it.
Weird.
Like, I mean, yeah, it's
They
like,
never
that's
found
a good
body.
guy. Yeah, exactly.
I
They
got
never
a question
found
for
his
you.
body.
I had a question for you, Rain.
Ask away.
So then, you don't have to answer, but I want to know personally, because I've never talked to you about this before.
Mhm.
Which ones of any of them do you truly believe are real?
The ones I truly believe are real, so there's ones that have evidence, and I say evidence like that in quotes because it's things where it's like that could be it or could not be it. But things like giant squid, like, oh yeah, we just know they're squids, they're just huge. But like, what constitutes as the titular giant squid, things like that. But I think the ones I believe, which
First
truly,
of his name.
first, I think like the big ones I believe actually do exist is like the chupacabra. Maybe not just the one exact one, but maybe like as a species it exists, and we just don't interact with it. Bigfoot as a broad sense, things like the Sasquatch or whatever you want to classify that creature as. I mean, there's sightings of things like that. Literally, if you look up a list of cryptids,
Yeah.
and you see them, they're always going to be described, and you could just say it's a Bigfoot. And I really feel like there's just something that's like, it passes as human enough to where, like in the woods, like you're either going to say it's a Bigfoot or a guy. And at that point, I feel like that's something that I wholeheartedly believe in, especially when you hear about like, oh, did you know in Russia they also believe the same exact thing, almost to a T? And it's like, and it's like, there's no way they would have had influence like on the like at the same exact time, things like that. I don't want to say 100% I believe in Mothman, but I don't know if you ever heard of the story of the black bird of Chernobyl, where it was before Chernobyl like went down, that there's reports of like workers or like people locally who saw what looked like just a big black bird, and then you see that it looks humanoid, and all the descriptions fit exactly the Mothman, but this is like years ahead of when like any Mothman sighting is ever documented.
Yeah.
And they're just like, who's to say it didn't fly over? And it's like, oh, there's other sightings that match this. And I really think that like, really it's like any species of Sasquatch, maybe a singular, if not multiple Mothman, chupacabra, usually like the things in the wilderness that you could feasibly catch, I wholeheartedly like believe in. Things that lean towards aliens fall into that conversation of course, extraterrestrial life could exist. Things that lead into sea monsters, of course, sea monster life could exist. But those are all hard, like, maybes. But the for sure's for me always come down to the actual tangible, like, we caught this on footage. You could disprove it. Here's evidence to say, though, that it could be proven right. I'm all for, like, believing that it's right. But I am gonna be like, I need to convince people who do not believe into it, and that's why you need always further evidence. It's always a bad thing when you see these things where they're like, oh, I have evidence of Sasquatch. I've only ever shown people that also believe.
Yeah.
And so they say I'm right, and it's like that's not gonna get you anywhere. You have to be able to have that and show it to people who don't believe, which is why when you go to West Virginia and they have all these Mothman statues and merchandise, you're like, I'm not gonna believe this. This is just a big marketing scheme. But when you go to like the location where it was seen, and you're just kind of like, yeah, I can believe if somebody saw this.
As a marketing trap.
Exactly, that's the thing too. Like,
story,
yeah, like if you go to if you look for the actual sources outside of that, and you find the evidence that could work, then yeah, it works. Like it just works sometimes, and like that's why I wholeheartedly believe 100% in like the terrestrial, like literally down to earth. like nature-like cryptids out there. But if it's like aliens or sea monsters, that's always the big what if. And so that's like a kind of a 50-50. Like
see,
I
the
want to
funny
believe
part-
him, as you say, but
The funny part is I'm actually kind of opposite, right? The ones that I'm more
Mhm.
inclined to believe are real are the ones that are
Mhm.
underwater. And then
right,
the only thing that I'm like sure of in this world when it comes to like beings that we can or can't prove exist
right,
is just by virtue of us being here. I'm I'm like 99.9%. I'm 100% sure that aliens exist. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And that we're aliens to some other planet. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So I'm exact opposite when it comes to the aliens. I'm
right,
more inclined to believe like the underwater stuff, you know, because it's like I said, you know, the ones on land, those are the ones that like, if there were evidence, we'd have that evidence right now. You know, that's how I feel
exactly,
personally. But hey, man, like, it's like I said, I want them to be true. I want them to be
yeah,
true, and we ended up finding out just like a few years back, right, that unicorns were real, and that
yeah,
was millions of years. Was it millions of years ago? And it was like almost a horse or a rhino-sized creature, and it had a
Yeah.
big ass horn
yeah,
on its head.
yeah. And it's like, oh, this is a unicorn. It's like you're telling me this now,
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that could easily have been somebody coming across those skeletal. You know, that's just the thing is like dude, come across
yeah,
those skeletal remains, and then you just build it in your head like, holy shit,
And,
this
s-
was a horse with a fucking
and
spiral
then
horn on his head.
and I
yeah,
just want I just want to interject real quick because I think like the whole like seeing is believing sort of thing, like it is so easy to disprove something, but when it comes to trying to get somebody to believe in something, it's just like you gotta like jump for miles and miles. And like obviously evidence can be fake, like doctoring, whatever, like this and that editing software. But like jumping on what you said about like what other countries have seen, and like even Asia, like all that, like the legends and the
yeah,
tales that they would say of like dragons and
Yeah.
these creatures, this and that, like that is to them, like real
yeah.
stuff. Like that's legends that they tell for generations that they're wholeheartedly believing. And then when it comes to like the skepticism here, it's like almost like, oh well, this is dumb. Like why would this exist? Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But yeah, like
Yeah.
you mentioned, like if you found evidence through fossils or excavation, even seeing like paintings on it, like why would
Yeah.
somebody just write that down on like a cave wall? You know what I mean? Unless they
Yeah.
saw something that at least somewhat looked like it to them.
It's like Roanoke, where it's like, why would these settlers, if they were abducted by some sort of species or anything, not put a more clearer message of
Yeah,
here's what
an
happened instead of one
entire
word in a
colony.
tree, and it's just like, oh, maybe it's you have to decode it. It's like you think they thought that far? Like they would dig a hole and put a plant
Hold
in
up.
there and just
Hold up.
expect it to grow.
But yeah, no, I think that like yeah, even going on what you said, like that was an entire colony that just literally disappeared overnight. Like
Yeah, and it's just like evidence always comes down to, well, why couldn't you get more? And sometimes, especially nowadays, where we can have super HD cameras on phones and everything, it comes down to, well, the mass populace might not have a super big like fancy phone. They might have something that can only work slightly, or they don't know how to use it properly, and so we get really grainy footage. Like I didn't know until recently that you know some people only record through like apps like social media, and they record footage that way instead of just using their native camera. And so that's why most like footage is grainy, because they're not using their native camera. And so it's like, oh, the lights over, I forgot which state it was, which city, but it was like some city where they saw lights going over. And I'm not talking about like the famous one that was like
Swamp
disproven
Camp.
like forever
Yeah.
ago. I'm talking about like recently, and it's just like, whoa, what is that? And it's like all this grainy footage, and then it turns out it's like, oh, there was like a space shuttle launching, and it was in the middle of the night, and you could only see the lights like from the back of it or something. And it's like, oh, that's easily explainable. And it's like, yeah, you could also see that if you weren't using your grainy camera and if you were actually looking at it. And it's just little things like that where sometimes the evidence hurts because you're not using the right
Yeah.
stuff, but at the same time document everything you can, because you never know when that'll be it. It's like, take as many pictures, take as many like recordings. If you think
Yeah.
there's cryptid out there outside your door, get every camera you have and start recording right now. Bust out your don't bust out your like
Fun
Nokia
saver,
phone.
yeah.
Exactly. Don't turn on your webcam and point it over there. Like, just get your phone and use that. Like, something, do something that's gonna get it out there to help people that believe, so that
Yeah.
they can have like the evidence to show it.
The camera
That's
in your
what it comes
phone.
down to.
Yeah, the camera in your phone is always going to be more advanced than like mostly anything else like that's within reach, really. But
Exactly.
especially whenever you're going from like that whole paranormal to like the supernatural, and they'll
Yeah.
show it sometimes like in movies and TV shows. It's like, oh, I tried to record it, but this is what happened, and it's either static or like the footage is destroyed or something
Yeah.
ridiculous like that. Yeah,
Yeah, we
like
talked.
I mean, even the most famous is oh, you can't record a vampire. You know what I mean? Like they don't show up on film. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Like maybe that was just their way of explaining something away. They're
Yeah.
not
And
they're not in the mirror.
yeah.
We talked about it like in one of our earlier videos. Like the things you can get away with on a camera these days, you can shoot
Yeah.
professional level movies on these cameras these days. Like there's a
Yeah.
whole ad campaign from iPhone right now that's showing you
Yeah.
just
You
what
can
they
shoot.
can manage just off of that
Yeah.
iPhone. You know, so there's no fucking excuse. Do a little.
Yeah, it lowers production costs. There you go.
And not to derail into like paranormal talk, but I mean, you see all the time on these shows now they use phone cameras to record everything because it's like, oh, it's a mobile camera that you can plug into anything, that you can download like an app or put a filter on to have it get like another camera setting,
Yeah.
and it just went and it record and it saves everything to itself with an internet connection that you can send it to something else. Like it's the perfect camera. The
Yeah.
only thing that makes it worse than a professional grade is that those professional grade cameras you can attach all this stuff onto it to get like a shot from 50 miles away. But and it's just like use what's around you to get the evidence to help people who need the evidence
Yeah.
for these kind of like cryptid creatures. Like I know personally speaking, I've never myself like outside of that event, I've never like looked outside my window and saw like a creature like looking back at me. And I think what hurts a lot of times for that is that some people will do things like that and post it to the internet, and there'll be creatures that are obviously fake, like works of fiction,
Yeah.
and then somebody will see it who doesn't know what they're
Cyberhead,
talking
oh my
about.
god.
Yeah, like Siren Head is completely fiction. The creator themselves even said, like, I follow the creator, and they said themselves, like, dude, whenever you see merch or videos covering it, if I'm not involved and they're making money, that's not going to me. Because they're selling it to people who believe it's real when it's not. It's a work of fiction. It's a character I created, and I even, like, trademarked it, but they're still doing this, and, they just have more money than me so they can get away with it. Things like that. They're like, this
Or
is going to fall into,
Slenderman,
like,
dude.
internet.
Slenderman,
Just
exactly.
Slenderman.
I was
They
trying to bring
literally
it
made
up.
the movie The Tall Man with Jessica Biel.
Yeah.
They
Which
profited
is just-
off of that bullshit. Like,
Yeah, and they're just, like, based on a real event, and it's like, obviously not. And
And
all
those
it
kids
hurt.
too, with the murder. Yeah, like stuff happened because of this shit. Like that's
Yeah, and even
insane.
then that whole like tragic event, people will go to that and be like, "See, it is real," and it's like, no, it's not. Literally, there's evidence of the creator coming out and saying, "I have the
Yeah.
files of when I edited the thing. It's not
Yeah.
real," and it always hurts because then people are like, "Well, if that's not real, I guess this isn't real either," and it's like that's not how that works. It should be the other way around, where you're like, if this is
Ogopogo.
real, we should look into that. Yeah, I had to actually look up the Ogopogo, and I was like, "What is the Ogopogo?" It's like, "Oh, it's just a sea monster, like in Europe."
Plesiosaur.
Or, yeah, and it's just like, all right, cool. And it's like, oh, but somebody was like, I call it the Ogopogo. I'm like,
Well,
oh wow, that's
I
I
cool.
call it the Oingo Boingo.
Yeah, the Oingo.
I have another question for you.
Yeah, I call it the police.
Does it or does your subscriptions end at Cryptids, or like is there other off, like, you know what I'm talking about, like off topics that people
Yeah.
generally kind of
So my tier list of 100% believe to that can't be happening. So
Forget about
100, yeah, forget about it. 100% believe is always going to be like the terrestrial cryptids as we spoke about. Right under that of most likely they could, but I could also see it not. Because evidence for both is sea creatures in space, and then below that of just like I want to believe. Ironically, I have a shirt that says that, but I couldn't find it in time. I want to believe, but I can see where it might not. Is things like the paranormal, and not like the Nightwalkers or like the Flatwoods or anything. Like I'm talking about like, oh, here's a ghost hunting show, and it's like I want to believe this is real, and I can see where this is coming from. But knowing that this is a produced TV show, I have to say there's a chance it's not happening. And that's just because, like, in my lifetime, you can chalk it up to anything. There was a time where I worked a job and where I was alone most of the time with, like, no sleep, long hours. Like sometimes it'd be dead quiet in there, and I'm like, I'm seeing something outside my eye at nighttime. There's a ghost, and it's like, no, you're just sleep deprived. And then, there's things like that where it's like, oh, we have evidence that this exists. It's like, cool. Here's 50 people to tell you why it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And it's just like, for every one piece of evidence, you have to have 51 pieces of counter arguments, and that goes into like paranormal, like ghosts, seeing spirits, things like that. And of course you always feel that, but then it's always written off as like, well, yeah, because your body feels like the electricity in the air, and that makes you feel weary. Oh, it's also a big coincidence that demons and ghosts can work off of electrical impulses, which is like, of course they would, because I can't tell if you're being genuine or if that's part of your show. And so that's why for like paranormal stuff, that's always in the back of my mind of, I agree, it can exist, I want it to exist. You're gonna have to like a ghost will have to hold my hand and like make pottery with me. Something along that lines. And then under that is just like all the small things of just like, oh, did you see that goblin over there? It's like, no, I didn't, because that's not real. Like,
you being stupid.
Yeah, it's like, oh, maybe it's another creature. It's like, sure, but don't tell me it's a goblin. I'm not gonna believe in a goblin. Like, are you crazy?
So
says the man who said he wants to find Bigfoot.
So like one of my favorite shows of all time is Ghost Adventures. And it's not because like, it's not because I believe in ghosts. It's not because of anything else. It's because Zach Baggins and the cast are just so fucking funny, right? They're just so fucking. They're really fun to watch. And I remember one episode where they were in like this old Western prison from way back in the day, and they pointed their cameras up at the stage. You know that little device that shows like the skeletal, the outline, like the lines, and it shows the balls for the feet and then the balls for the hand, whatever, right?
Yeah.
He pointed it up at the stage where people would normally be like performing, right, with guitars, and banjos and whatnot, and there was a full band on stage, like skeleton figures that were coming up on the screen, and they were playing banjo or whatever, right? And I just remember, like, don't get me wrong, right? Like, I never took the show seriously, but that was the moment where I was just like, man, this is just there really is no legitimacy to this show. I don't believe there's any legitimacy to Ghost Adventures. It's so hard to believe. I used to work at a local newspaper. I worked in the basement of a damn near, I think it was a little over 100-year-old building, and that part of the building was 100 years old. And everyone had always told me, all the press guys had always told me there was a ghost, all this different stuff, right? I literally and intentionally sat in that basement for 4 years watching horror movies, intentionally trying to scare myself.
Getting yourself amped up.
Exactly. I got myself to a point where I just, like, horror movies don't really affect me much anymore.
Of course.
But I never saw this ghost. I never saw this ghost that everybody had claimed to see, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, for me personally, I spent more time there than anybody else. You know what I mean? And I was by myself. There was no reason for this spirit. If its sole intention is to creep fuckers out, like, why not me?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I wanted that moment so bad.
Yeah, I'm not in an exact same situation, but when I worked at a fast food establishment, there was a day where in the back, they have like the 5-pound like soda bags that you put into the machines so that you can get your sodas at the front or in the back. Those things don't move easily. And they were like, hey, we need you to stack those. And I stacked them with my own eyes. I stack them. They're perfectly fine. 2 managers come by, they go, hey, good job on the stacking. Those are not moving anywhere. And then in the middle of the night, I'm just like, so does anything weird happen around here? Because I keep hearing the weird things happen around here. And they're like, we like to say that there's a ghost here, but I mean, it's just things falling over. It could be anything really. And as they're saying that, one of those boxes falls over, and not in like the, oh, like here's the front, like, oh, it slides like that, like tipped over.
Yeah. And
I go, and they're just like, what, you didn't stack it right? And I was like, I did. Ask those 2 people. And they go by, they go, yeah, something moved that. And if nobody, and they have cameras, and they're just like, we didn't see anything, something moved it. And I'm like, oh, well, can we check the footage? And of course, on our end, we're not allowed to, because they're like, oh, well, only corporate gets the actual feed. We just pretty much have it just to check, like, for them to look at. And I'm like,
The
of
missing
course it
footage.
does.
It's like,
And I'm like, of course it does. Yeah, I was like, can I? Do I have to fill a form? Like, I was legitimately just like, I want to see it. And they were just like, we'll ask. We always ask, and they never give it because they don't care. And I'm just like, dude, like, this is the moment.
Just
And
pick up
as
the Coke and put it in there.
You're
Stop
too
worrying
much.
about ghosts.
I'm worried about the line moving, okay? Like,
On your-
of course
on
I put it, and, you know, of course we put it back, and then, you know, as we're closing, we were checking everything, and nothing else happens for the rest of the night. But I'm in that room, and I'm just like, I'm here, dude. Like, bring it. Like, what's happening? Tell me. Like, you know, I'm always down to, like, I'm the kind of person that's just like, if I go to somewhere and you tell me that there's a spirit there who's gonna, like, shake you and tell you, like, bugaboo, get out of my house, I'm gonna be like, well, I'm gonna go there with bells on my body, and if you hear me shaking, like, start recording now.
Covered in
Like,
flowers so you can see the handprints.
yes, like, there's that. I don't know if it's in Texas or not, but there's like that trail or like that roadway where, like, oh, you put your car in flower and babies will push it, and I'm like, sure.
It's not babies. It was school
Some
children.
sort of ghost. I don't know. Either way, every time I see stuff like that,
Right? Like how many? Oh no! I want to deconstruct that right now. How many fucking babies do you think it would take? They're pushing a car across a railroad.
if it's a ghost, baby has plenty of time to train and get stronger. So for all we know,
little
one
buff boys
just pushes it. But, you know,
ridiculous.
it's always things like that where it's like, oh, we have. It's like you, a person, you, the viewer, you know, somebody comes up to you and they're just like, hey, you want to experience this ghost event or this cryptid event? You want to see this thing with your own eyes? Yes, I do. And then you go, and there's one of two things going to happen. It's going to happen, and no one's going to believe you, or it's not going to happen, and you're going to be disappointed. And it always comes down to that. And that's why, as an avid believer myself, I'm always just like, I always want something to happen where I see it and it happens and there's evidence there, and I can show people who don't believe. I'm like, look at it with your own two eyes. It's right here. Like, come on, believe it.
I want to make two real quick points here. Number one, Stellaby, you're 6'5". No ghost wants to fucking see you. Why the fuck would they want to go after you? Like you're a mountain of a man. Like, no, it's not happening. I'm sorry.
I used to, like, literally think as I was walking down the long hallways, like, it's there, trying to creep myself out, and then of course I'd open the door, thinking, oh, it's gonna pull me now into oblivion, and it never did. And I was like, oh, damn it.
No. They want like the fucking shorter person, or they want the shorter body. Exactly. They're like, this guy's 6'5". Fuck that. He's gonna pull me. No.
Yeah.
And
you
then
have
second,
a lot of body to have ghosts inhabit you and trap them like a prison.
Exactly. You're the fucking ecto trap. Second point is I'm the exact opposite of Rain. I don't want that experience. I don't want to be the guy who fucking sees any of this shit. I don't want to be part of it. And they're like, oh, this is like a 250-year-old, you know, fucking abandoned courthouse. Let's go explore. Yeah. I'm like, cool. Grab me a shirt on y'all's way out. I'll be in the fucking car. Like, I don't want that experience. And, you know, this is the whole thing about the whole Halloween things. Yeah, I've been watching a lot of fucking scary movies, horror movies. Been scaring the absolute shit of myself. I have a very low tolerance for this shit. Fucking just no, like, and that's the reason why I'm so against modern horror, because it is just a bunch of like jump scares and shaky cameras without any put to the thought to scare people. But like, no, I don't want to be part of this fucking paranormal bullshit. Like, I don't care if the fucking Sasquatch is out there. Great, like, unless he is the most malevolent creature, I don't want to have anything to do with it. Like, I'll be the guy who's like, yeah, I'm gonna watch the fucking stuff out here.
Yeah, just to add to that,
all the doors.
Just to add to that, just because you brought up like horror movies, I wanted to say this on here. I wanted to give a really big shout out. There's a horror movie. I don't know if you've seen it, and I wasn't sure if you were gonna bring it up. There's a horror movie called, it's found footage, right up my alley, called Noroi, The Curse. It's a found footage movie. It's pretty long. It's like almost 3 hours. It's a very slow build up, but the director, I had to look up the name so I could say it correctly here. The director, Koji Shiraishi, amazing movies that he makes, obviously works of fiction, obviously horror movies. You know, he's gone on interviews saying like, oh, here's my inspirations. Fantastic horror movies. I watch those horror movies. I am scared for my life afterwards from how like absorbed you are into it, where you're put into that like mindset of like, oh my god, I think something might happen to me,
Yeah.
hauntingly, to the point where in my own room after I watched it with my lights off. I like had to flash my lights off and on real quick, make sure nothing was here. And then in the morning, I was like, of course nothing was gonna happen. Why would anything happen that night different than another night? But when you get into that mindset of like, when you're amped for the mindset, you know, sometimes your mind plays tricks on you, and then that's where the evidence is hard to like prove because you're like, I gotta make sure I'm not being biased.
Paranoia.
Yeah,
Are you
which is
easily scared?
It depends, like, because I'm such a believer in like all this other stuff. When it comes to the paranormal, I'm always just like, you know, of course, 50-50. It couldn't, but you always want to play it safe.
Like
So
you
I'm
want.
yeah.
You're inviting it.
If somebody tells me like there's a vengeful spirit in the basement of this prison where 60 people were murdered, and one of them had your exact name, and I'm just like, all right,
I'm going straight down to the deepest part of that building. That's how I am.
exactly. I'm like, okay, I want to investigate. I want to try and find what's happening. I want to have all the proper tools. Out of respect of that ghost, if at the slightest hint I hear something say get out or leave, or I feel like some presence is forcing me out, I will go, thank you, I'm leaving, I'll be back tomorrow. Because I'm just like, I don't want to get on that bad side and then be like, well, now I'm the one who's possessed, and in the possessed state the ghost is like, watch this, and rips all the evidence and then leaves, and it's like, no one will believe you. And I was like, oh, thanks, ghost. Awesome, cool. More work that I have to do, and it's possible.
I want to bring up two more things. I'm sorry, because number one, if I were a ghost, if that was like 100% a real possibility, unless light of day was directly harmful for me, or like, oh, you couldn't survive without like dissipating, I would straight up attack people in the fucking middle of the day. Because I'd be like, well, what the fuck? It was the middle of the day. Like, what the hell? Like, no, this is not what's supposed to happen. I was in the middle of the day in the haunted house. Like, no, fuck you. You're on my time. I'm the dead one. Yeah. And two, what if you're in that scenario? You're in the deepest part of the fucking, you know, chasm, the prison, whatever, and the ghost is speaking a language of which you're unfamiliar with. It could be inviting. It could be inviting you down, but you're like, oh, this sounds hostile, let me freaking leave. But then at that point, you've disrespected the spirit, and now it wants revenge.
Not to go back on the movie, but I did recently watch Drag Me to Hell, and that movie pissed me off.
It's stupid. It's one of the dumbest
and I was like, this is a perfect example of, wow, you really don't win if you go up to a ghost, because either you're like, I'm being sane and now I'm cursed, or I have to cooperate and I might be cursed.
And that's why.
You need to know what you're getting yourself into. I'm perfectly fine if I go into that basement if a ghost pushes me and is just like, out of here, and I'm like, can you do that again? But let me put some like flour so that you can see the handprint, and then I'll leave. I'm cool. Later. It's like I got the evidence I need.
And that's why Stelby brought up, you know, It Follows, because it's like, you follow all the rules of this fucking movie, and at the end it doesn't matter. Like, it's stupid. Like, what's the point in watching something like that?
Yeah.
Like, it's
really
cheap.
Like that. Like, after looking at the like the information on it, what it was supposed to be about, it's just, again, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, if you as a writer or you as a director are trying to deliver this message and everybody fails to get the message, so you have to now explain it, you've failed as a communicator. That's your
and
that's not on anybody else.
Yeah, and it kind of goes like when you're out looking for, like when you're looking for evidence for like the Goat Man or the Jersey Devil or anything, and you're like, okay, locally and through research, what have you done to meet this creature? And it's like, oh, this time of night, this time of night, this day, this circumstance, whatever. Okay, I'm gonna go replicate that. If nothing happens, then you're caught in this loop of, well, now we have to try other things. But if something does happen, and you're like, how come nobody else has done this? And so it comes to that point where it's like, it's always going to be a 50-50 like chance of, am I going to see something today or not? I better just be ready, and I better see enough to convince other people. And my dad used to always say this thing that, like, his big retirement plan was always going to be like, I want to get a big old truck, I want to go to the woods, and I want to look for Sasquatch, and as soon as we see Sasquatch, we're running to the truck, and we're gonna observe it in the safety of that metal vehicle. And I'm like, you wouldn't want to get up and close? It's like, no. I'm just like, that's the wholehearted believer of like, oh my god, we found it. I really don't want to die getting close to it. What do we do now? And it's like, you kind of creep closer, like trying to get as much evidence, 360 pictures, like some sort of sample, something. And even then, it might not be enough. Like even then, like someone's gonna come out and go like, well, that's just the hair of my neighbor. I know because it's also brown. And I'm like,
That's
thank
just my
you.
cousin. I would happily go down into a basement by myself.
Yeah.
I'd have no qualm with that whatsoever. Like, it's not gonna bother me. I just, that's just me personally, though.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of people out there that would not be that way.
I would have to go in, but with a group of people, so that if something does happen, like, okay, I'll go in, but I understand that if something happens to me and I'm the only one with evidence, like that ruins the whole purpose. So there has to be a group of people with me that is just like, if anything happens to me, I want you to know exactly where all the recording software, like hardware, is, so you can take it and get out. And I may also get out if at the first instance, we get the chance to get on this ghost's good side. And if it's like, hey, get out of here, ghost hunters, I'll be like, see you tomorrow, and leave and be like, see, we're establishing a relationship here so that we can work together with the ghost. Something, be on the safe side. Yeah, be on the safe side, and don't just be like, no, we're going to get this ghost angry, because that's how we get the best results. It's like, no, whatever.
I think the difference is between me and Rain is you would be looking for evidence for the cause, whereas I would be looking for evidence for myself.
Exactly.
Probably get me killed. I think. Kind of like with the whole the ring.
Yeah,
shit.
If it goes in a personal like message to you specifically, you're like, cool, and you leave. But if it does it to me, I'm like, cool, can you say it again? And like, I have a camera. That was funny. That conversation of just, no, I would definitely watch The Ring. I need to know if it's real or not. And it's like,
same thing.
Yeah,
100%. Why would I not?
I think I ended up watching. Did I watch?
No,
I see your disapproval.
I would not. No, as I said before, like if somebody's telling me within the confines of this tape, this cursed video, that if you view it, you are gonna die 7 days from now, I'll be like, okay, I'm not watching it. Like I don't think I need any other reasoning to be like, that's all right. The rules. Okay, let me put it this way: any sort of supernatural, paranormal, mythological, whatever sort of thing you want to call it, if any sort of rules are ever set in place that this has to be here to you to see it, for it to happen, for you to do it, then no. Like you're automatically saying that this is not an awakening, welcoming thing. If you have to abide by like this certain guidelines to make it appear or not die, it's like, that's just a no for me, dog.
My problem is that I'm a curious cat, and my skepticism will probably get me killed in that scenario.
I don't outweigh it. Yeah, I get it. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, yeah, like X-Files, I want to believe, but it's just like, dude, I'm.
And
I want to
right? Like,
put it there.
Just because like I have those thoughts doesn't mean I don't enjoy those subjects. Like, X-Files is one of my favorite shows. I mean, it's so good. Agent Mulder is one of the coolest characters ever. I love David Duchovny, but
Cool.
I can enjoy those things.
I saw that.
Sorry, I can enjoy those things, and love the idea, but then it's just, for me, it all, I don't know, maybe I've had the fun sucked out of my life, and I'm just like one of those people that just have a hard time believing. But
no, I mean, it's understandable, and like you want certain things to go a certain way because that's just what you see, you feel. I mean, I have a story about the closest I've ever personally been to what I believed was the paranormal, and I hate telling it just because it's like I know how I personally feel about stuff like that, so it's just like, man, like if I like was just so oh, maybe I was just scared, maybe I was just young, and it's just like I don't want to believe that it happened, so I don't expect anybody else to. So
my problem is that I look back at all those stories, because I've had those stories as well, but I look back at all those stories and now I tell myself, like, well, I must have just had something wrong. Must have been a dog and not a chupacabra. Must have.
Exactly.
Must have been just something in the hallway that, looked out of place, and it wasn't a face staring directly at me. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
Must have
I
been a
look
buddy,
back at
not a
those things and
friend.
do that.
Yeah. I mean, and sometimes that's what ends up happening, especially with various like paranormal, supernatural, paranatural, whichever, where, in the heat of the moment you find all this evidence, and then, you go back like a year or two later and you're like, actually we can disprove this, but we have more evidence of this thing happening. And that always comes back down to it of just, you're never done. We're never done finding evidence for this. The only thing that will ever happen is if one day, like a government, official or somebody who
Leaks.
can,
We got him.
yes, somebody who would actually gain a lot from showing this truth, and not just some like normal person out there would be like, oh, I have successfully captured and compromised Bigfoot, and it's just like cool, and like, oh, we have evidence of other big feet out there also, and you're just like, awesome. How come all these other guys don't get credit? And it's like, oh, well, they didn't have government tanks and funding. They didn't have as much good things as we did. I just wanted to add, because we were talking about the ring, I got like in my mind sidetracked. I was gonna say, oh, I recently saw the ring, but I saw the Japanese ring, but I was getting that confused with the Changeling, because there's also a scene in that movie where you have to go into a well. It's just like, I was like, that's not the movie with George C. Scott in it, is he? He's not in the ring, right? I was like, no, he's in The Exorcist, and like 2 other movies that I could think of.
All right, hey guys. Hope you enjoy this different kind of format for the video here. If you enjoy what you saw, and maybe you want to see more, guests on the show, just different talks, different points of view. Be sure to sound off in the comments below. As always, we'd love to hear from you. We welcome that dialogue. We want to hear your thoughts. Good, bad. What do you agree with, what you don't, and keep a lookout for next week's Halloween video. We'll be doing our top picks on the horror genre in general, what we think the best are. As always, I'm Arrow for the win.
And I'm Stellaby. Thank you for coming on, Rain. It's always a pleasure talking to you, man. You always have me cracking up good. So
no, I had a lot of fun. We talked about some good stuff. Hey, and if I ever have other topics, I'll just send them to you. Even if I'm not on the show, I'll be like, hey, y'all should check this out and just talk about it.
Yeah.
No,
Definitely.
But yeah, no, I had a great time. Pretty fun.
Yeah, we'll just talk about some bullshit, man. We don't give a shit.